Third Lieutenant Jiwoo stepped over shattered glass and chunks of concrete, her scaled foot crushing a human photograph frame. The once proud research outpost lay in ruins around her, smoke still rising from several buildings. Her four-person squad followed closely behind, weapons ready despite the obvious absence of survivors. Another empty nest, Jiwoo said, her translator converting her natural hisses and clicks into human language. She adjusted her helmet's atmospheric filter as the acrid smell of burned electronics filled the air. These humans fled quickly, but not quickly enough, said Corporal Dury, kicking over a damaged computer terminal. Look at this primitive technology. Hard drives and physical keyboards. My hatchlings have more advanced toys. The other draconids chittered with laughter, their scaled faces stretching into what passed for smiles among their kind. 6 weeks. Into the invasion of Earth, and the novelty of crushing a supposedly advanced civilization hadn't worn off. Command wants us to gather intelligence, Jiwoo reminded them. Fan out and download any intact data. Sergeant Taiho, you're with me in the main lab. The oldest member of her squad nodded silently. Unlike the younger soldiers with their bright green scales, Taiho's hide had dulled to a deep forest color, with age. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as he adjusted its focus. The laboratory was surprisingly intact. Banks of servers hummed quietly, emergency power still flowing through backup systems. Jiwoo plugged her data harvester into the main terminal, the small disc-shaped device immediately beginning to copy all available information. These humans showed more resistance than expected, she said, watching the progress bar slowly fill. The orbital bombardment should have broken their will immediately. Taiho grunted. They're stubborn creatures. Stubborn but ultimately doomed, Jiwoo replied. Their weapons barely penetrate our basic armor. Their aircraft fall from the sky when our disruptors activate. They're fighting with sticks against a galactic power, the data harvester chimed, its work complete. Jiwoo removed it and projected a holographic index of the captured files. What is this? She asked, selecting a folder labeled Unexplained Phenomena. Some kind of military research? The files opened into hundreds of video clips, news reports and scientific papers. Jiwoo's eyes narrowed as she skimmed through them. Gather around, she called to her squad. You need to see this human propaganda. The first video showed grainy, security camera footage of a small female human lifting the rear end of a ground transport vehicle, what humans called a car, to free a trapped child. The vehicle must have weighed at least 2 tons. Obvious fake, said Dury, mandibles clicking. In amusement. The next clip showed a human male surviving a fall from a tall structure, walking away with only minor injuries. Another displayed a human continuing to fight, despite what should have been fatal wounds. Such desperate lies, said Corporal Mina, the squad's weapons specialist. They create these myths to make themselves feel stronger than they are. Look, at this one. A human child supposedly survived without water for 11 days trapped in rubble after an earthquake, added Dury. Their biology doesn't allow for that. Our scientists confirmed humans can only survive 3 days without water. Jiwoo scrolled through more files, humans displaying remarkable strength during emergencies, surviving extreme cold, performing feats that defied their known biological limitations. The Federation encountered more than 200 sentient species. Before these humans, Jiwoo said. None created such elaborate fictions about their capabilities. How pathetic. The squad's laughter echoed through the empty laboratory. All except for Sergeant Taiho, who stood silently examining the files with unusual intensity. Something troubling you, Sergeant? Jiwoo asked, noticing his silence. No, Lieutenant, Taiho replied quickly. Just wondering why they would document these obvious falsehoods so systematically. Fear, said Mina confidently. They hope stories of superhuman abilities might make us hesitate. Classic psychological warfare, just extremely primitive. A distant explosion rocked the building, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Speaking of primitive warfare, Jiwoo said, Command reports human resistance cells have increased activity in this sector. They're using some kind of projectile weapons that occasionally penetrate our lighter armor. She tapped her wrist computer, pulling up a tactical map. We should move to Extraction Point Delta before sunset. As they prepared to leave, Jiwoo noticed Taiho copying additional files from the human server. "Finding something valuable, Sergeant?" she asked. "Just thorough, Lieutenant," he replied. 50 years in military service teaches you to collect everything. You never know what might be useful." Outside, the red sun hung low in the sky, partially obscured by smoke from distant battles. Their transport craft waited on what had once been a landing pad, its sleek diamond-shaped hull gleaming despite the dust. Jiwoo took one last look at the ruined human outpost before boarding. These creatures, with their fragile bodies and laughable myths, would soon join the hundreds of other conquered species in the Draconid archives, just another footnote in their empire's glorious expansion. If only she had noticed the slight tremor in Taiho's hands as he stored away those human files, or the troubled look in his organic eye. If only she had wondered why the oldest, most decorated sergeant in the fleet seemed so disturbed by what everyone else considered silly human propaganda. But she didn't. And that oversight would soon change everything. The Draconid transport craft hummed low over the rugged landscape, its anti-gravity engines barely audible against the whipping wind. Inside, Lieutenant Jiwoo studied the canyon terrain on her tactical display, her scaled finger tracing the planned route. "This shortcut will save us 3 hours," she informed her squad. "Command wants our reconnaissance data as soon as possible." Corporal Dury looked nervously at the narrow passage ahead. "The humans have been using terrain to their advantage. Lieutenant, this canyon provides limited maneuverability. Are you suggesting humans could outthink Draconid tactical systems?" Jiwoo's inner eyelids flicked dismissively. "Our scanners show no heat signatures or electronic emissions. Besides, their primitive weapons can barely scratch our armor." Sergeant Taiho, who had been unusually quiet since leaving the research facility, finally spoke up. "Humans are adaptable. They learn quickly." "Your caution borders on respect, Sergeant." Jiwoo replied sharply. "Remember, these are the same creatures who believed they could defeat our dreadnoughts with nuclear missiles." The transport dipped lower, entering the canyon. Sheer rock walls rose on both sides, their reddish-brown surface glinting with traces of metal ore. The pilot, a Draconid named Goro, kept the craft center channel, maintaining a steady altitude of 50 meters above the canyon floor. "Beautiful desolation," Corporal Mina commented, gazing through the view screen. "Once we've pacified this world, the mining guilds will strip these mountains bare." Without warning, the transport lurched violently. Warning lights flooded the cabin. With crimson light, "We're hit!" shouted Goro, fighting the controls. "Some kind of projectile. It's not showing up on scanners." "Impossible," Jiwoo hissed. "Their weapons can't—" A second impact rocked the craft, sending Jiwoo slamming against the bulkhead. The transport began spinning, losing altitude rapidly. "Emergency landing," Goro yelled over blaring alarms. "Brace for impact." The craft struck the canyon floor, skidding along loose rocks before coming to rest against a boulder. Sparks flew from damaged panels, and the acrid smell of burning synthetic materials filled the cabin. "Status report," Jiwoo demanded, pulling herself up from the floor. "The craft is disabled," Goro reported grimly. "Engine core is ruptured. We'll never get it airborne again." "Notify command of our position," Jiwoo ordered. "Request immediate extraction." Mina checked the communications array. All channels are being jammed. It's crude but effective technology. They're flooding every frequency with noise. "Humans shouldn't have jamming technology," Dury protested. "Intelligence said they were at least a century away from developing countermeasures to our communications." "Well, intelligence was wrong," Taiho said grimly, checking his plasma rifle. "We should assume they're watching us right now." As if on cue, the first projectile struck near the downed craft, sending dirt and rock fragments flying. The squad rushed out, seeking cover among nearby boulders as more projectiles, simple metal slugs accelerated to tremendous speeds, pounded their position. "I count 12 separate firing positions," Jiwoo said, her helmet's enhanced vision picking out muzzle flashes. "They've surrounded us completely." Another volley of projectiles struck Dury's cover, chipping away at the rock. One fragment ricocheted, striking his arm joint where the armor was thinnest. He howled in pain as blue blood seeped from the wound. "Their aim is improving," Taiho observed calmly, returning fire with controlled bursts from his plasma rifle. The weapon hummed with each discharge, sending bolts of superheated matter toward the human positions. A human scream confirmed at least one hit, but the incoming fire only intensified. Jiwoo watched in disbelief as the humans shifted positions with practiced coordination, maintaining their suppressive fire while advancing. "They're using military tactics from our own tactical database," she realized aloud. "The research facility, they must have recovered our training protocols. Or they're just good warriors," Taeho replied, firing again before ducking as bullets struck dangerously close to his position. A shadow passed overhead, an Earth aircraft, primitive but effectively camouflaged against the darkening sky. It released several objects that plummeted toward the Draconid's position. "Explosive ordnance," Jiwoo shouted. "Scatter!" The bombs detonated in sequence, sending shockwaves through the canyon. Rock fragments rained down as dust clouds billowed upward. When Jiwoo's vision cleared, she saw Mina lying motionless, her armor cracked open like an eggshell. "They're closing in," Dury called out, his voice strained with pain. 3 o'clock position." Through the settling dust, Jiwoo glimpsed the humans for the first time. Their combat suits were nothing like the flimsy armor she'd seen before. These were reinforced with what appeared to be salvaged Draconid technology, giving them a hybrid appearance, partly human, partly alien. Leading them was a tall figure whose helmet bore distinctive markings, clearly their commander. His movements were precise and confident as he directed his squad's advance with hand signals. "We can't hold this position," Taeho said, reloading his weapon. "There's a mining entrance 50 meters northeast. If we can reach it, the tunnels might provide escape routes." Jiwoo nodded. "Covering fire on my mark. 3-2-1 mark." The Draconids unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, temporarily forcing the humans to cover. Using the moment, they began retreating toward the mine entrance, Dury limping between Jiwoo and Taeho. They'd almost reached the entrance when a human soldier appeared on a ridge above them. The projectile weapon in his hands looked different, larger, with a distinctive barrel configuration. When it fired, the sound was unlike anything Jiwoo had heard before. Taeho crashed to the ground beside her, a gaping hole in his chest armor. Blue blood pulsed from the wound as he gasped for breath. "New weapon," he managed to say. "Penetrating rounds." Jiwoo fired upward, forcing the human to retreat, then grabbed Taeho by his armor straps. With Dury's help, they dragged the wounded sergeant into the dark mine entrance as more humans converged on their position. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. Ancient mining equipment cast strange shadows in the dim emergency lights of their armor. "They've adapted our technology, studied our tactics, and developed weapons specifically to counter our advantages," Jiwoo said, her voice hollow with realization. "How is this possible in only 6 weeks?" Taeho coughed, blue droplets spattering his mandibles. "Perhaps," he wheezed, "we should have paid more attention to those human myths after all." The deeper recesses of the mining complex offered temporary sanctuary from the human assault. Jiwoo found a defensible chamber nearly half a kilometer underground, where massive drilling equipment created natural barricades. Ancient conveyor belts hung motionless from the ceiling, their metal frames corroded by decades of disuse. "Set up a perimeter," Jiwoo ordered Corporal Dury, who was applying a medical seal to his wounded arm. "Use motion sensors at all tunnel entrances." She turned her attention to Sergeant Taeho. The veteran soldier lay propped against the base of an enormous drilling machine, his breathing labored. The wound in his chest continued to seep blue fluid, despite the emergency compression field they'd activated. "The field generator is failing," Jiwoo said, adjusting the small device attached to Taeho's armor. "You need proper medical attention." "We both know that's not happening, Lieutenant," Taeho replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "Those humans have us trapped. Their commander knows exactly what he's doing." Above them, distant explosions rumbled through the rock. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as the humans methodically cleared and secured the upper tunnels. "They're being thorough," Dury observed nervously. "Professional. Nothing like the disorganized resistance we encountered during the initial invasion." Jiwoo knelt beside Taeho, lowering her voice. "You've been acting strange since we found those human myths in the research facility. You weren't surprised by their capabilities today. Why?" Taeho's cybernetic eye whirred as it adjusted focus. "You're observant, Lieutenant. That's good. You might survive this. Answer me, Sergeant, that's an order. Taeho coughed, blue droplets spattering the front of his armor. I knew the humans would adapt quickly. I tried to warn High Command. Warn. Them about what? About the humans' greatest strength. The very thing those so-called myths documented. Taeho reached painfully into a compartment in his armor and withdrew a small data crystal. This contains classified information from my first mission to Earth. Jiwoo took the crystal, inserting it into her tactical computer. A holographic display flickered to life between them, showing footage date-stamped 50 years earlier. You were on the original reconnaissance team, Jiwoo asked, surprised. That mission was just observational. No contact protocols. That was the official directive, Taeho agreed. But my team leader, Commander Neon, decided we needed field samples. We captured 3 humans from an isolated research station near what they call the Arctic Circle. The hologram showed 3 humans in a containment cell aboard a Draconid scout ship. They looked terrified, but physically unharmed. Standard biological assessment protocols, Taeho continued. We tested their strength, endurance, cognitive capabilities. The results were unimpressive, physically weaker than Draconids with slower reflexes and limited sensory range. Nothing suggested they could pose any threat to us militarily. The footage advanced, showing the humans undergoing various tests. Taeho tapped a command, forwarding to a specific timestamp. Then there was an accident. A containment breach in the ship's engine room released toxic coolant. 2 crew members were trapped inside. The hologram showed emergency alerts flashing through the ship. In the confusion, one of the human captives, a female with long dark hair, escaped her restraints. What happened next made Jiwoo lean forward in disbelief. The footage showed the human rushing to the engine room, punching in an emergency override code she must have memorized during her captivity. As toxic gas filled the chamber, she forced. The jammed door opened with strength that should have been impossible for her frame, dragging out the 2 unconscious Draconids before collapsing herself. Medical scans afterward showed she had torn muscle fibers throughout her body, Taeho explained. Bone microfractures in her arms, severe chemical burns in her lungs. By our understanding of her physiology, what she did should have been physically impossible. A statistical anomaly, Jiwoo suggested, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Taeho shook his head painfully. We thought so too, until we ran controlled experiments. The next footage showed laboratory settings. The humans were placed in simulated emergency situations, some real, some fabricated to create the impression of extreme danger. Under sufficient stress, their adrenal glands produce compounds that temporarily transform their physiology, Taeho explained. They access strength reserves normally blocked by their own nervous systems. Their pain threshold increases exponentially. Their focus becomes laser-sharp. All species have emergency responses, Jiwoo countered. Fight or flight mechanisms. Not like this, Taeho insisted. We documented cases where humans exceeded their normal physical capabilities by over 300%. They can bypass what should be physiological absolutes when survival depends on it. And the most remarkable thing, they pass these stories down. Those myths we mocked, they're not myths, Lieutenant, they're warnings. Another explosion much closer now shook the chamber. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. Commander Nyun submitted a full report recommending caution in any future military action against Earth. Taeho continued urgently. But the Admiralty buried it. The conquest of Earth was already being planned, and our findings complicated the narrative of easy victory. They classified everything. If what you're saying is true, Jiwoo said slowly, then our entire invasion strategy is flawed. We assumed technology would easily overcome biology. Exactly. And worse, we've created the perfect conditions to trigger their biological response across their entire species. Taeho gestured weakly at the tunnels above. Those humans hunting us aren't just soldiers anymore. They're fighting for their planet's survival. Every one of them is capable of becoming what they call, he coughed painfully, what they call a hero. Jiwoo's tactical computer chimed with an alert. The motion sensors were detecting movement in all approaching tunnels. They've found... Huz? Dury reported nervously. There's more. Taiho whispered, his voice growing fainter. "Something we discovered in the final experiments, something even more troubling about humans." "What?" Jiwoo asked, leaning closer to hear the dying sergeant's words. "They learn," Taiho said, "faster than any species we've encountered, and their adaptations become biological over just a few generations. Those myths about their heroes, they're not just stories, they're evolutionary signposts." Before Taiho could explain further, the chamber's entrance erupted in weapons fire. The humans had arrived. Blinding light flooded the mining chamber as specialized human breaching charges detonated at the main entrance. Jiwoo's helmet automatically dimmed to compensate, but Duri wasn't so lucky. His visor cracked from a previous impact, leaving him momentarily blinded. "Contact front," Jiwoo shouted, dragging the wounded Taiho behind a massive drill bit that had fallen from its mounting decades ago. Her plasma rifle hummed to life as she took aim at the billowing dust cloud where the entrance had been. Human soldiers poured through the breach like water through a broken dam. Their hybrid armor, salvaged Draconid technology grafted onto Earth-made combat suits, gleamed under the emergency lights. They moved with disciplined precision, each fighter covering specific angles as they secured the chamber. Leading them was the commander Jiwoo had spotted earlier. His helmet bore distinctive markings, a jagged line resembling lightning etched across the visor. Unlike the others, who carried modified projectile weapons, he wielded what appeared to be a captured Draconid shock staff, a close-quarters weapon typically reserved for the Imperial Guard. "Weapons free," Jiwoo ordered, opening fire on the advancing humans. Blue-white plasma bolts cut through the dusty air, striking one human soldier squarely in the chest. The impact knocked him backward, but remarkably, his armor held. These weren't the same flimsy protection suits Jiwoo had seen humans wearing during the early invasion. These had been specifically designed to disperse plasma energy. The humans returned fire with devastating accuracy. Their projectile weapons had been modified, firing dense metal slugs wrapped in some kind of energy field that bypassed Draconid armor's deflection properties. A soldier to Jiwoo's right collapsed. A neat hole punched through his helmet. Two more fell as they attempted to retreat to better positions. "Fall back to the secondary chamber," Jiwoo commanded, helping Taiho to his feet. The wounded sergeant could barely stand, but somehow managed to shuffle alongside her as they retreated through a narrow tunnel connecting to another excavated area. Duri provided covering fire, his plasma rifle overheating from sustained use. "I can hold them here, Lieutenant," he shouted over the cacophony of battle. "Get the sergeant to safety." Before Jiwoo could protest, the human commander spotted Duri's position. With a hand signal, he directed two soldiers to concentrate fire on the tunnel entrance, pinning Jiwoo and Taiho down. Then he moved forward himself, shock staff crackling with blue energy. One of his soldiers, a stocky human with a bandolier of grenades across his chest, advanced too quickly, breaking formation in his eagerness to reach the tunnel. "Hana, hold position," the commander barked, his voice carrying clearly over the din of battle. Too late. The soldier named Hana stepped into the open, directly in Duri's line of fire. The Draconid's plasma bolt struck her in the neck, where her armor joined her helmet. She collapsed instantly, body convulsing before going still. Time seemed to slow. The human commander stared at his fallen comrade, his posture changing subtly. His grip on the shock staff tightened until the metal creaked audibly. "Lieutenant," Taiho whispered urgently, "we need to move now." "Not without Duri," Jiwoo insisted, readying her weapon to provide covering fire. "You don't understand," Taiho rasped. "It's happening. Watch." The human commander removed his helmet with deliberate slowness, revealing a face etched with scars and eyes that burned with an intensity Jiwoo had never seen in any species. Those eyes locked onto Duri, who was frantically trying to unjam his overheated weapon. What happened next defied explanation. The commander covered the distance to Duri in a blur of motion, moving faster than Jiwoo's combat systems could properly track. The Draconid raised his sidearm in desperation, firing 3 shots at point-blank range. All 3 struck the human's chest armor, leaving smoking impact points, but he didn't even flinch. with a roar that seemed to shake the very rock around. Them! The commander swung the shock staff. The weapon connected with Duri's arm, severing it cleanly at the elbow. Before the Draconid could scream, the human's other hand shot forward, fingers curling around Duri's throat with such force that the armored scales cracked audibly. "Impossible," Jiwoo whispered, her weapon forgotten in her hands. His muscle density couldn't possibly... The human commander lifted Duri, all 200 kilograms of armored Draconid soldier, with one hand, then slammed him into the rock wall with such force that the stone cracked. When Duri slumped to the ground, he didn't move again. 2 more Draconid soldiers who had been providing rear security emerged from cover, firing desperately at the human. Their plasma bolts struck him repeatedly, burning through his armor in several places, exposing charred flesh beneath, wounds that should have been instantly incapacitating. The commander didn't seem to notice. He moved toward them with the same unnatural speed, the shock staff whirling in his hands like an extension of his body. The fight lasted seconds. Both Draconids fell, their armor torn open like paper. "What's happening to him?" Jiwoo asked, unable to look away from the carnage. "Adrenaline surge," Taeho whispered. "Cortisol, norepinephrine, testosterone. His body is flooding with chemicals that are temporarily reconfiguring his physiology. Pain receptors shutting down. Muscle fiber recruitment at maximum. Reaction time accelerated." The commander turned toward their position, blood from his wounds dripping onto the stone floor. His eyes seemed unfocused, almost glazed, as if looking through them rather than at them. "Run," Taeho urged. "I'll slow him down." "You can barely stand," Jiwoo protested. The human commander started toward them, stepping over his fallen enemies without a glance. Behind him, his soldiers watched in silent awe, making no move to join the fight. They'd seen this before. Emergency. "Exit," Taeho gasped, pointing to a narrow maintenance shaft half hidden behind mining equipment. "Leads to lower tunnels." The commander's path was blocked by an ancient mining excavator, a massive piece of equipment designed to bore through solid rock. Without breaking stride, he ducked beneath it, gripped its undercarriage, and began to lift. Metal groaned and hydraulic fluid dripped as the multi-ton machine slowly rose from the ground. Veins bulged on the human's arms and neck, his face contorted. With effort, but still he lifted higher and higher until the excavator balanced precariously above his head. "Their myths aren't propaganda," Taeho whispered, his voice filled with a terrible wonder. "They're warnings." With a final roar of effort, the commander hurled the excavator directly at them. The massive machine tumbled through the air, crashing against the rock wall and bringing down a cascade of stone that blocked the tunnel entrance. In the chaos and darkness that followed, Jiwoo dragged Taeho toward the maintenance shaft, the sound of the human's rage still echoing through the collapsing mine. 3 days of navigating pitch-black maintenance tunnels had left Jiwoo exhausted beyond measure. Taeho had died during the second night, his wounds finally overwhelming even his veteran's resilience. Jiwoo had been forced to leave his body behind, taking only his data crystal and personal identifier tags. Now, as she crawled from a drainage pipe onto the surface, twilight painted the devastated landscape in shades of purple and grey. In the distance, the silhouette of a Draconid retrieval ship stood out against the horizon, its sleek outline unmistakable even at this distance. Jiwoo checked her armor's systems. The communications array had been damaged in the mine collapse, but basic transmitter functions remained operational. If she could get closer to the retrieval ship, she might be able to send a direct signal. She moved cautiously across the open terrain, every sense alert for human patrols. The fighting in this sector had been particularly fierce. Craters and debris fields marked the sites of multiple engagements. The burned-out husks of both human and Draconid vehicles littered the battlefield like the skeletal remains of strange beasts. A sudden movement sent her diving behind the twisted wreckage of a hover tank. Heart-pounding, she peered through a gap in the metal. A small group of humans picked their way through the debris about 70 meters away. They weren't soldiers, civilians by their appearance, scavenging for supplies. One of them, a young female, looked up suddenly, staring directly at Jiwoo's hiding place. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Instead of shouting an alarm, the human simply nodded once, then deliberately turned away, leading her group in another direction. Jiwoo remained frozen, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Had the human recognized her as Draconid and chosen not to alert others? If so, why? There was no time to ponder the strange encounter. The retrieval ship's engines were powering up. She needed to reach it before it departed. Summoning her last reserves of strength, Jiwoo sprinted across the open ground, her armor's damaged servos whining with the effort. She activated her emergency beacon when she was within 500 meters of the ship. "Hold departure," she transmitted on all Draconid frequencies. Lieutenant Jiwoo, 3rd Reconnaissance Division, survivor requesting extraction. The ship's ramp had already begun to close when her signal reached them. It paused, then slowly lowered again. 2 heavily armed soldiers emerged, weapons ready. As they scanned for threats, "Identify yourself," one called as she approached. "Lieutenant Jiwoo, security code Epsilon 97 Talon," she replied, raising her hands to show she wasn't a threat or a human in disguise. They escorted her aboard. Quickly, the ramp sealing behind them as the ship's engines throttled to full power. Inside, a medical officer approached with a scanner, checking for hidden explosives or tracking devices. Standard procedure now that humans had begun using Draconid technology against them. "You're lucky, Lieutenant," the ship's commander said. As she was cleared, "This is the last extraction from this sector. The entire region is being abandoned." "Abandoned?" Jiwoo asked, unable to hide her shock. "We've established 7 forward bases in this territory alone." The commander's expression darkened. "The situation has changed. We're implementing Protocol 17 across all Earth operations. Protocol 17, full strategic withdrawal. The highest level of retreat in Draconid military doctrine, reserved for only the most catastrophic military failures. I need to speak with Fleet Command immediately," Jiwoo said. "I have critical intelligence regarding the humans. You and everyone else," the commander replied grimly. "Get cleaned up first. We break atmosphere in 10 minutes. In the ship's communications center, Jiwoo waited as her transmission was processed through multiple security protocols. Finally, the holographic display activated, revealing the stern face of Admiral Kiori, Supreme Commander of the Earth invasion. "Force Lieutenant Jiwoo," the Admiral acknowledged. "Your survival is unexpected. Report." Jiwoo inserted Taiho's data crystal into the terminal, along with her own helmet's recording of the events in the mine. "Admiral, I have evidence that the humans possess biological capabilities that our intelligence severely underestimated." As the footage played, the Admiral's expression remained impassive, but Jiwoo noticed her inner eyelids flicking rapidly, a sign of intense emotional response in their species. "Sergeant Taiho was part of the original Earth reconnaissance mission," Jiwoo explained. "His team discovered these capabilities 50 years ago, but the report was classified and ignored." "Lieutenant," the Admiral interrupted, "we have received 17 similar reports in the past 36 hours from across the invasion front. Entire Draconid battalions have been overcome by small human units displaying these anomalous capabilities." The Admiral manipulated controls on her end, and multiple video feeds appeared alongside Jiwoo's transmission. Each showed similar scenes, humans performing feats of strength, speed, and endurance that defied their supposed biological limitations. In Beijing, 3 humans breached a secure command center by physically tearing through reinforced doors, the Admiral continued. In Novosibirsk, a lone human fighter continued engaging our forces despite sustaining wounds that should have been immediately fatal. In Brasilia, a human transport pilot remained conscious and functional after experiencing G-forces that would rupture a Draconid's internal organs. "It's as Taiho said," Jiwoo breathed. "Under sufficient stress, they transform." The High Command initially dismissed these as isolated incidents, the Admiral said, but the pattern is now undeniable. Furthermore, the humans are displaying unprecedented adaptability. They're integrating our technology into their weapon systems within days of capturing it. Their learning curve is exponential. On the main viewing screen, Jiwoo could now see the majestic curve of Earth falling away as the ship ascended to orbit. The blue-green planet looked deceptively peaceful from this distance. "The withdrawal has already begun," the Admiral confirmed. The Imperium cannot justify the losses we're sustaining. This was supposed to be a simple conquest of a pre-interstellar species. With respect, Admiral, Jiwoo said, I request permission to compile a comprehensive report on the human biological response, including Sergeant Taeho's classified findings. Future expeditionary forces will need this information. The Admiral was silent for a moment before responding. Granted, but be aware, Lieutenant, the Imperium has never before abandoned a planetary conquest. This failure will be politically sensitive. As the ship broke free of Earth's gravity well, Jiwoo began composing her report. The words flowed easily, urgently, as she recounted everything she had witnessed firsthand. Her conclusion was simple, but devastating. We invaded believing. We understood our enemy. We mocked their legends as primitive superstition. We were wrong. Humans don't exaggerate their capabilities, they've undersold them. They are the only species whose bodies literally don't know when to quit, and now we've given them something to fight for. Looking back at the shrinking blue planet, Jiwoo added one final observation. In our arrogance, we have accomplished something no other force in human history has achieved. We have united them. And in doing so, we may have created not just an enemy, but an entirely new evolution of human capability. The galaxy should take notice. Earth is not a planet to be conquered. It is a warning. The end.